Why is that? Can we? Okay. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the new ones. Today the title for this lecture is The Unknown Book. That's the first part. There is 3 or 4 lectures related to this topic. And we're going to be looking at science and as it is found in the Bible. You know that today there seems to be a conflict in between faith and science. There is, religious people say the world was created by God. Science says everything comes through evolution. And even Time magazine has made echo of this war, of this debate, and says, is the Bible fact or fiction? What does science tell us about God? So what we're going to do through these lectures is we're going to actually look at what the Bible says, because there is many people out there that they think that know what the Bible says, but have they actually looked at the Bible and read what it says? That's the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. It says, by faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen, and that's a very interesting sentence, were made of things which are invisible. And it's something we know now, that everything that is made and we see is made of particles that we don't see, like atoms, neutrons, protons, electrons. That Psalm, 1,000 years BC. In the beginning you laid the foundations of the earth. It's referring to God as the creator. They will perish and they will wear out like a garment. Because that process is called entropy, that is known as the second law of thermodynamics. So basically it's the law that everything left to itself degrades. And you see that in a building. You have a building, a car, and if you don't look after it, in a few weeks, months, everything rots, collapses. And that's what the second law of thermodynamics says, and that's what the Bible already said, that everything wears out. Also in Psalm 1000 BC, speaks of the fish and all the creatures that swim in the paths of the sea. And you will see that actually uses this sentence, paths of the sea. That's the Bible text. Remember, it's 1000 BC. The fowl of the air and the fish of the sea and whatsoever passes through the paths of the sea. So basically when you look at the sea, ocean, you don't see a path. You just see a big amount of water and that's it. But look, in the 1600s, and wasn't until the 1860s that there was oceanography, was Matthew Fontaine Maury, he was from North America, that he was the one that discovered that the entire ocean all around the earth is made of a circulating system where you have currents. That's him. He was born 1806, died in 1873, and he was nicknamed Pathfinder of the Seas and the father of modern oceanography and naval meteorology, and later scientist of the seas. And here's what he said, look what he discovered. Extensive works in his books, especially the physical geography of the sea in 1855, the first extensive and comprehensive book on oceanography to be published. Maury made many important new contributions to charting winds and ocean currents, including ocean lanes for passing ships and sea. And this is still used today by ships and people traveling in the sea. But the Bible already said, 1000 years BC, that the sea, the oceans are made of paths. The number of stars. So Jeremiah, he was a prophet for the kingdom of Israel or Judah, I can't remember, I think it was Israel. And he wrote, as the stars of the heavens cannot be numbered. And we read this today and we think, of course, there is millions and billions and trillions of stars. But he wrote this in 630 BC. But before the invention of the telescope, there were scientists that were counting the stars. Ptolemy, 150 AD, he said there was 3,000 stars. We only can see 1,000. But now we know that there is billions and billions and trillions. And the more powerful the telescope gets, more stars are discovered, more planets are discovered. And that's what the Bible said, that you cannot count the stars in the sky. That's Genesis 1:16. That's the account of the creation week. And this verse talks about the creation of the sun and the moon, but doesn't say sun and moon. That's what it says. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And you read this and you think, okay, yes, of course, the sun gives more light than the moon. We all know that. But actually, the Hebrew meaning for these words, greater and lesser, is referring to the size. It's not referring to the amount of light they give. These are the words gadol and katan. And look, it wasn't until 250 BC that Aristarchus, a Greek astronomer, was the one that discovered that the sun was actually bigger than the moon, even though it was written in the Bible 1,500 years BC. So that's like 3,500 years ago. Because when you look at it, the naked eye, when you look up, what you see is the moon always looks bigger than the sun, always. But actually, the Bible told you that was the other way around. Again, Psalms. You know what is fascinating about science in the Bible? That all the scientific statements you find in the Bible are found in the oldest books in the Bible. In Genesis, in Psalms, in Job, that they are all books written by Genesis and Job, books written by Moses, 1500 BC. It's like God knew that in the future science would be used to contradict, to go against the Word of God. So here the evidence is that the Bible and the most ancient books in the Bible, they already told you what the science had not discovered yet. Psalm 18:15, 1000 BC. They speak of the valleys. Jonah, 800 BC, speaks of the mountains at the bottom of the sea. The valleys of the sea were exposed and the foundations of the earth laid bare at your rebuke, Lord, at the blast of breath from your nostrils. But notice mentions valleys, the valleys of the sea. And Jonah, to the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath barred me in forever, but you, Lord my God, brought my life up from the pit. So Jonah is already saying that at the bottom of the sea, because obviously the story of Jonah is that he nearly drowned in the sea, that there is mountains at the bottom of the sea. That's a very interesting one too. In Leviticus, also written by Moses, 1500 BC, says, for the life of the flesh is in the blood. And now we know that if you bleed, you die. And basically, I work as a lifeguard, and one of the things we first check when someone is unconscious, the very first thing you check after checking for response is check for major bleed. Because if he's not breathing, and you start giving CPR, mouth to mouth, whatever you do, if he's bleeding and it's a major bleed, doesn't matter how much oxygen you put, he's not going to die. But people didn't know that, because George Washington, he died because he was bled to death. In those days, when you got sick, some doctors would just puncture your skin, make you bleed, thinking that the disease whatever was causing the disease would just come out of your body. And that's how George Washington died. He bled to death. It wasn't until 1616, physician William Harvey, that was discovered that the blood circulation is prominent to maintain life. Also, these two, I really like these two. Isaiah was a prophet. He lived in these years, was when he prophesied, 740 BC, 670 BC. He wrote, it is he, talking to God, that sits upon the circle of the earth. And the Hebrew word is circle, it's a rounded sphere. And the inhabitants thereof are as grasshoppers, that stretches out the heavens as a curtain and spreads them out as a tent to dwell in. Even Greek scientists did not know that the earth was rounded. They didn't know it. And even though we get all our philosophy comes from the Greeks, but scientifically the Greeks were wrong in this statement. Job, another 1500 BC, It is he who spreads out the northern skies over emptiness and hangs the earth upon nothing. Basically, Job was saying the earth is floating, nothing is holding the earth. Again, the Greeks, where all our philosophy, even our theory of evolution, didn't start with Darwin, it started with the Greeks. They believed that Atlas, which a very fit, big guy, was holding the earth. The Hindus believed there was a turtle. Chinese and Native Americans believed there was a serpent or also a turtle. Some cultures in Africa and India believed it was an elephant. But the Bible said that the earth is floating on nothing 3,500 years ago. That's a very, very, very good one, because how could they know this? There is no way they could know this, because this has been discovered recently. In Amos, look at where he lived, 700 BC, he was a prophet that prophesied during the kingdom of Jeroboam in the kingdom of Judah. You know, Israel was divided into Israel and Judah. So that's what he wrote. Seek him, talking about God, that makes the 7 stars, which is the Pleiades here, and Orion. And it's interesting to mention these two. Seek God, because he's the one that makes the Pleiades and Orion. And in Job, and also again, the oldest book in the Bible, I don't know if you're familiar with the story of Job. Job went through a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, and he gets into a conversation with God, and there is things he doesn't understand why he's going through that pain and suffering. And then God is talking about his might and his power and saying to him, there is things you cannot understand. Can you explain me this? Who gives the strength to the horse, or who created this or the other? And one of the examples God gives to him, to Job, he says to Job, can you bind the chains of Pleiades? And in contrast, or loose the cords of Orion? Because that's something that science has recently discovered, that the system of Pleiades, which is formed by 7 stars, it's a bound system, because the same gravity that unites them and keeps them together is equal to the gravity outside that wants to pull them apart, so they don't move. And in contrast, loose the cords of Orion, because the belt of Orion, these 3 stars, they are moving apart from each other as the time goes by. And the Bible already said that before the invention of the telescope, and 3,500 years ago. The circulation and the cycle of the air, Ecclesiastes, written by King Solomon. The wind goes to the south and circles about to the north. It circles and circles about continually, and on its circuit the wind returns again. That's what we've seen, really. If you look at some maps of the way the sun hits the earth, that's why you get different wind patterns across the planet. And the Bible already said that there is a cycle of the air around the globe. The weight of the air. Also Job, when God, he gave to the wind weight and allotted the waters by measure. We cannot feel that there is weight to the air. But the weight the wind has some weight. That's why it's called pressure. That's why we have low pressure, high pressure. In a new edition of the Essays, the Jan Ray, reviewed in Nature of July 9th, an attempt is made to assign this discovery to Ray, and so far to regard Torricelli, Galileo, Pascal, and Descartes as his disciples. Without claiming to be an authority upon Ray or upon Galileo, I would direct attention to the statement made in Galileo, His Life and Work by Fahey, that Galileo's way of determining the specific gravity of the air was first described in his letter to Valiani, dated 12th March 1613. Ray's Essays was published in the year 1630. And the Bible said already 1500 BC that the air has pressure, the air weights. Also the water cycle. Now everybody knows this. The sea gets heat, they get heated up, the steam comes up, clouds move, eventually it rains, goes back to the mountains, down to the rivers, into the sea, and this cycle is repeated. But that wasn't known. Only the Bible knew those things. Look, history of hydrologic cycle theory, that's taken from the internet. In ancient times, it was thought that the land mass floated on a body of water and that most of the water in rivers has its origin under the earth. So they thought that water in the rivers was coming from under the earth. Examples of this belief can be found in the works of Homer, about 800 BC. By roughly 500 BC, Greek scholars were speculating that much of the water in rivers can be attributed to rain. The origin of rain was also known by then. These scholars maintained the belief, however, that water rising up through the earth contributed a great deal to rivers. Examples of this thinking included Anaximander, 570 BC, who also speculated about the evolution of land animals from fish. That's where evolution comes from the Greeks. And Xenophanes of Colophon, 530 BC. Chinese scholars such as Qi Nitsu, 320 BC. Lu Xin Chun Chiu, difficult to say, 239 BC, had similar thoughts. The idea that the water cycle is a closed cycle can be found in the works of Anaxagoras of Clazomonea, 460 BC, and Diogenes of Apollonia, 460 BC. Both Plato and Aristotle speculated about percolation as part of the water cycle. But also in the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon, that's the time he lived, 970 to 931 BC. That's what he wrote. All streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. Which is true. It's always rain, water from the rivers going to the sea. How come the sea doesn't overflow? To the place the streams come from, there they return again. So basically he was already talking about the water you see going from the rivers into the sea goes back to where it came from to go back into the river, back into the sea. It's the water cycle. That the earth spins. 400 years before it was scientifically discovered, the Bible mentions that the earth spins in order to give us night and day. And also in the book of Job, 1500 BC. And also is God talking to Job. Have you ever given orders to the morning or shown the dawn its place? It is turned as clay to the sill. So God is saying to Job, the earth turns the same way clay is turning to the sill, spinning around. And the Hebrew word is turn, means to turn something, spin around. I love this one. Psalm 139. This verse has made some scientists to become believers for what it says. Also, we're talking again 1000 years BC, long time ago. For thou hast possessed my reins, thou hast covered me in my mother's womb. I will praise thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made, which is something we know now thanks to science, that the human body is just amazing. Marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. My substance was not hid from thee, when I was made in secret, and curiously brought in the lowest parts of the earth. Is using poetry to refer to his mother's womb. Thine eyes did see my substance, yet being unperfect, and in thy book all my members were written. Notice it says book, written, which in continuance were fashioned, when as yet there was none of them. That's very, very interesting. And now we're going to look at this last verse, verse 16, and we're going to look at words like substance, book, written, fashioned, and we're going to look at actually the Hebrew meaning of them. The word book, the Hebrew word is sefer, and it means a decree or set of instructions that are written on a scroll. Do not picture a book like we have today. The word is a scroll. And what does a scroll do? It has like a spiral shape. So what do you think is the book that is written with instructions in the shape of a scroll inside our bodies? The word substance, it comes from the Hebrew word golem and means a fetus or embryo. The instructions for the development of the fetus or embryo is determined by the information in the scroll. Next we will consider all my members were written. It comes from one word, kathab, and means information that prescribes or directs. A manual of instructions, that's what it is. That is, the various parts of the body are all prescribed in this scroll. The word translated fashioned comes from yatsar and means something that comes into form according to a predetermined plan. Finally, we consider incontinuance. This comes from one Hebrew word, yom, and means a specific or special period of time, that is the development of the embryo or body over time, and its proper sequence is also recorded in this scroll. So if we translated this to modern English, we would read this: God has a scroll with prescribed instructions that determine the development of my body with all its members in the proper sequence over time from the embryonic stage. So what do you think is the book of instructions inside our bodies, even before we are formed? DNA. It's talking about the DNA. That's what DNA is. It's a book of instructions on how to build a human being. Again, in Job, mentions the springs of the sea, that at the bottom of the oceans there is a springs of water. Have you journeyed to the springs of the sea or walked in the recesses of the deep? The word for springs is nebek, an unusual word referring to the places where water issues or bursts out of the earth, like with a great force coming up. The discovery of ocean floor springs represents a great milestone in the scientific investigation of the earth. Before 1930, little was known about the ocean floor. And then there was more investigation in the 1940s. In the 1960s, metal-rich hot brines were discovered using sonar in the bottom of the Red Sea. This brine was an indirect evidence of water coming out of the ocean floor. Aided by reports from Mexican abalone divers, scientists using scuba equipment located shallow water hot springs along the coast of Baja California in the late 1960s. So they discovered the springs of water in the late 1960s. But the Bible told you 3,500 years ago that these springs already existed. The first direct observations, so first was by sonar, they discovered that, but then direct observations, they could see them, wasn't until 1973. Then there was more reported by National Geographic in 1979, and also reported by Science News in 1980, that there is a springs coming out of the bottom of the sea, springs of water. Again, Job, by what way is light parted? And that's what the word is shalak or shalak, that means to separate, distribute, and divide. And that's what we know now, that light is divided. That's how you get the spectrum of colors. The diagram from Sir Isaac Newton, crucial experiment, 1666 to 1672. A ray of light is divided into its constituent colors by the first prism, and the resulting band of colored rays is reconstituted into white light by the second. So comes the light, goes back to the rainbow colors, and then comes back out as a white light. And by the way, Isaac Newton loved to study prophecies. He wrote books about prophecy, Bible prophecy. Because, by the way, the Bible is the only religious book with prophecy. You won't find prophecies in the Hindu Vedas, in the Quran, in all other writings, Book of Death of Egypt. The Bible is the only one with prophecies. Again, Job, what is the way where light dwells? The word for way, derek, literally means a traveled path or a road, so that the light has a place where the light travels. And wasn't discovered until the 17th century that the light has really a way where it's always in a straight line. Light travels in a straight line. Also in the Bible you have hygienic laws. Exodus, that's God, according to the Bible, God talking to Moses. You are to be my holy people, so do not eat the meat of an animal torn by wild beasts. Also, you shall have a place outside the camp. Think about it. There was over 2 million people living around the desert, traveling around the desert for 40 years. So, to keep hygienic laws, it's difficult to keep hygienic laws when you go out camping with your mates, 3 or 4. Imagine when you're living with over 2 million people. And that's what God instructed to Moses. And you shall have a place outside the camp where you may go out, and you shall have an implement among your equipment, like a shovel, and when you sit down outside, you shall dig with it and turn and cover your refuse. Basically, God was saying, when you go and you do your necessity, you dig a hole, you relieve yourself, and then make sure you cover it, don't leave it there. Also in Leviticus 1400 BC, and when he that has an issue is cleansed of his issue, then he shall number to himself 7 days for his cleansing, and wash his clothes, and bathe his flesh in running water. It's interesting that first mentions quarantine, and second, how to get washed in running water, and shall be clean. And here are the sanitary practices that have been adopted by the Western world specifically. For centuries, doctors denied the possibility that disease could be transmitted by invisible agents. However, in the late 19th century, Louis Pasteur demonstrated in his germ theory of disease that most infectious diseases were caused by microorganisms originated from outside the body. Yet these core principles of sanitation were being practiced by the Israelites thousands of years earlier. The Israelites were instructed to wash themselves and their clothes in running water if they had a bodily discharge, if they came in contact with another person's discharge, or if they had touched a dead human or animal carcass. They were also instructed to wash any uncovered vessels that were in the vicinity of a dead body, and if a dead carcass touched a vessel, it was to be destroyed. Items recovered during war were also to be purified through either fire or running water, I guess because of blood, and you never know who these items belong to. In addition, the Israelites were instructed to bury their human waste, what we just read, outside the camp, and to burn the waste of their animals. And here there is more reference where you can see the instructions on these sanitary practices. These sanitary practices, without question, saved countless lives in the Israelite camp by protecting them against infection caused by unseen germs. Meanwhile, their Egyptian peers were dying by the thousands due to remedies that almost always consisted of some amount of human or animal dung. By the way, the Egyptians built the pyramids, so they weren't stupid. They built pyramids that now some people we cannot even build. As mentioned earlier, the sound sanitary practices that we take for granted today only began to flourish about 100 years ago. I mean, all these diseases and practices is what caused so many deaths during Dark Ages, during the First World War, many wars. Quarantine laws in the Bible, 1400 BC. It was not until 1873 that leprosy could be shown to be infectious rather than hereditary. Of course, God knew this all along, as his laws to Moses reveal, and you can check this out at home. Leviticus chapter 13, 14, 22, Numbers chapter 19, verse 20, talks about how to deal with someone that has leprosy. His instructions regarding quarantine to prevent the spread of leprosy and other infectious diseases are nothing short of remarkable, considering that this life-saving practice was several thousand years ahead of its time. Infected persons were instructed to isolate themselves outside the camp until healed, and were to shave and wash thoroughly. The priests that administered care were instructed to change their clothes and wash thoroughly after inspecting a plague victim. And you can see that the devastating plague of the 14th century that claimed millions of lives was caused because people did not follow these instructions. Because in another thing that is not related to this, but is related to what we'll see in the next lectures, during the 14th century, during all these times, the Catholic Church had prohibited the Bible. The Bible was not allowed to be read. So if the Bible had been allowed to be read, all these millions of people probably wouldn't have died, because these sanitary practices would have been followed. Circumcision and blood clotting. Genesis 17:12. He who is 8 days old, it's not this that says 8 days old, doesn't say 1, 2, 3, or when he's born, or a few days. No, it mentions 8 days old among you shall be circumcised. Every male child in your generations, he who is born in your house. Medical researchers recently discovered that the two main blood clotting factors vitamin K, and prothrombin reach the highest level in life, about 110% of normal, on the 8th day after birth. So the blood clots easier on your 8th day after you've been born. These blood clotting agents facilitate rapid healing and greatly reduce the chance of infection. You can verify with any obstetrician that the 8th day of life is the ideal time for a circumcision, and that any circumcision done earlier requires an injection of vitamin K supplement. And that's also, I found on a website. Today we were talking about this. There was a little bit of a debate whether if this is true or not. But it's interesting that I found it on a secular website. It's not a religious website. It's talking medicinenet.com. And they say that there seems to be a link between sexual transmitted diseases with circumcision or uncircumcision, that men that have been circumcised has a less risk of contracting a sexual transmitted disease. And it's interesting that in Genesis, God already told Abraham, all your males have to be circumcised. Dietary guidelines. If we follow this, McDonald's wouldn't exist. Leviticus 7:23. Say to the Israelites, do not eat any of the fat of the cattle, sheep, or goats. It's just fascinating. It's been only for the last 20, 30 years that people have become obsessed about burning fat, when already the Bible told you, don't eat fat from animals. Also in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, all written by Moses, there is a list of clean and unclean animals, and guidelines are given for their consumption. If you go to Leviticus 11, I think it is, there is a list that God says to Moses, look, out of all these animals in the air, these you can eat, these you cannot eat, these animals in the sea, these you can eat, these you cannot eat, and on the land, the same, these you can eat, these animals you cannot eat. And there is a reason for that, because recently science discovered that the animals mentioned in this list have toxins which are detrimental for human health because of the diet of these animals and the way they digest their food. The unclean animals that the Bible mentions, they all have these characteristics. The blood cells in unclean animals are elliptical, so they have different rates of gas diffusion. Some of the animals classified as unclean they eat grass and plants, but eat their own feces, making them more susceptible to infection and concentration of toxins. Others are scavengers and have high levels of zootoxins and mucoid compounds that are rich in sulfate compounds, placing a big load of acidity in the system. And acidity is what causes cancer. Acidity in your cells causes cancer, changes the pH in your cells, and then you develop cancer. The marine animals classified as unclean in the biblical list includes everything that does not have fins and scales. So all seafood, out of the window. Why? Because seafood are scavengers. Seafood are the cockroaches of the sea. They filter all the crap that is floating in the sea. Well, if it's feces from other animals, rubbish from sheep, whatever it is, seafood filters all these things. Sorry, seafood, sea fish. Sea fish, no, did I say? Shellfish, yes. The marine animals classified as unclean in the biblical list includes everything that does not have fins and scales. Fish that lacks scales are generally carnivorous, so they eat meat, or they are scavengers, and one can expect high levels of toxins in these creatures due to biological magnification. The skin of the fish is a vehicle for the elimination of toxins via the mucoid secretions. Also, many sea creatures, like seafood, are filter feeders, I just said, and are highly prone to the accumulation of environmental toxins. They also contain allergenic compounds which can cause allergic reactions to individuals. I've got a friend that his dad died after going out for a big seafood meal. He came back, didn't feel very well, and poof, dead. Also, the fish listed as unclean belong to the highest trophic levels, which would make them prone to parasite infestation, because they are at the tropic level, at the high tropic level. They are the animal that eat an animal, that animal has eaten another animal, that animal has eaten another animal, so they are more prone to have disease and be infested. And it's fascinating, was all these food guidelines were written before the effect of food in the body was discovered, really. I think, yes. I think we're getting ready to the end. That's a prophecy written in the Book of Revelation, AD 95. And it's interesting that says, the nations were angry and your wrath has come. So he's talking about God being angry. And the time of the dead, that they should be judged. So God is judging all our actions and thoughts and deeds and word and even words. And that you, God, should reward your servants, the prophets and the saints, and those who fear your name, small and great, and should destroy those who destroy the earth. Who was destroying the earth 2,000 years ago? No one. There was no contamination. Maybe the only thing that they were doing was chopping some trees. But that was all, really. Wasn't as huge and big problem as we have today. All the earth pollution in rivers, sea, up in the air, everywhere. Also, the relation between mental and physical health. I think that's the last slide. Yes, and then we finish. Also written by King Solomon, was the third king of Israel in line. 970 to 931 BC. The Book of Proverbs, they are really nice proverbs to apply. You can apply them to your daily life. Very good wisdom. Light in a messenger's eyes brings joy to the heart, and good news gives health to the bones. Proverbs 16:24. Gracious words are a honeycomb, sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. So the Bible makes it clear there is a link between good news and being happy with your health. And it's something that science has recently discovered. Even there is, I think there is like fun therapy or humor therapy, I don't know what it's called. Make people laugh and be happy because they heal quicker. Proverbs 17:22. A cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. So if you are happy, you are healthy. If you are depressed and happy, the likelihood to be sick is bigger. Okay, that was all for today. Next week we're going to be looking at archaeology, because the Bible talks about countries, kings, peoples, cities that they were only mentioned in the Bible, and the higher critics during the 1800s, they mocked the Bible because the Bible was the only book that mentioned the kingdom of the Hittites, Babylon, the city of Petra, things that happened in Egypt, was only known by the Bible. So the Bible was mocked severely by higher critics. So the next two lectures we will look at archaeology, and we'll see what archaeology has dug out and what archaeology and stones tell us about the Bible, if it's true or not. So thank you for coming, and hopefully I'll see you next week.